Welcome all. Welcome all. We're going to deal with something that is very much on the top of our minds for the past year, sorry, in particular. And that is the extent to which our people go to offer, to afford a Jewish burial. And we see this so much since October 7th last year, with the great efforts that the IDF soldiers make to, retrieve bodies of hostages, to retrieve bodies of fallen soldiers, the superhuman efforts that were made after the massacres and pogrom of October 7th to identify and bring bodies to burial. It became a national obsession, and it became something, very important to us all. Why the importance in treating human remains with that level of almost self-sacrifice? I mean, to go and risk and lead troops to recover bodies. And it's not just the morale of the soldiers. It's very much something which is deep within the Jewish ethos in the value system. That a person who has died must be brought, Kever Yisrael must be buried among her brethren. So the first discussion of burial, not the very first, but the first funeral and burial described, is that of Sarah. Our parish is called Chaye Sarah, so that would be the life of Sarah. But of course, all that's mentioned about her life in the physical sense is how long she lived. That's the first verse. And then in the second verse, she passed on. And Kiryat Arba, that's another name for the city of Hebron. And then Avram Avinu has to get her a burial plot there in Hebron. And what follows is a lengthy discussion of the debate and haggling and dealing that Avram had with the locals, the Hittites, until finally he managed to secure a burial plot. It seems to be going into a lot of detail, which one wonders if, it's really even that we know so much about this. So after Sarai has died, we told that Avram arises and he goes to speak to the Hittites. And he says to them, I'm a resident alien among you. I'm not really one of you, but I live here. Please sell me a burial site among you, so I may remove my dead for burial. He asks for an achuzat kever. And the Hittites very kindly say, fine, my Lord, elect of God among us, bury dead in the choices of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you, but for burying the dead. So they said, no, we're going to give you a kever, kvarenu, at kivro. We will go. Avram is very grateful, but not quite, it seems, because he doesn't accept that. And he says, they have got the same verse twice there. He says to them, if you really want to, fulfill my wish, go and speak to Ephron, son of Tzachar, so that he gives me the particular cave of Machpelah that he owns at the edge of his land, and I'd like him to sell to me for a full price as a burial site in your midst. Now, why is Avraham Avinu asking for that particular place, the Marat HaMachpelah? There's an interesting medrash that describes how Parsha ago, Abraham had the visitors, and they came to him, the three angels, and he prepared a meal for them. And it says that he ran to catch calves because he wanted to feed them with delicacy, namely a calf's tongue, as pickled in mustard, seasoned in mustard. And it says, El HaBakar Ratz Avram. Avram ran after the calf. The Medrash says that the one little calf, because he actually caught three to prepare three tongues for the three visitors, one of the calves ran away. Avram chased it and chased it and chased it, and eventually it took refuge, Avram thought, in a cave. And when he entered the cave, he realized it was the burial site of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. And that's when Abraham kind of clicked. No, there's a reason why this little calf ran away and chased, made me chase him into this cave. And Abraham made a note that this was, a place where he would want to have himself and his wife buried. So it was obvious that that's what he was going to be asking for. And he asks if he can buy this for full price. Ephron says to Abraham, fine, my Lord, I give you this field. You can have the cave that's in it. I give it to you, bury it there. And Abraham bows, but he's not happy to accept it as such as a gift. And he says, no, listen to me. Let me pay the price of the land, accept it from me, so I may bury my dead there. And Ephron says, fine, this is the price. Land worth 400 shekels of silver between you and me. What is that? Go and bury your dead. And Avram agrees to the price, even though it seems it's on the high side. Avram listens to Ephron, counts the money out, 400 shekels going at the merchant's rate. So that seemingly is a higher exchange rate than the regular. And Ephron's land, Machpelah, the field with its cave, all the trees, everything there was word Vayakom means it raised up, it came up to a higher level. It was not Avram's possession, presence of the Hittites, and there Abraham buries his wife Sarah in that field, and the field now rises up to become the possession of Abraham, Achuzat Kever, as a burial site. Now, this seems strange that so many verses, I didn't count, but about 20 verses are dealing with this transaction and with this place and that place and who he bought it from. And probably that could have been summarized, in one verse. Abraham went to the Hittites and they buried the burial plot. There seems to be something deeper than that going on. And in fact, we get a bit of an inkling and a feeling into the importance of burial, the importance of purchasing a burial site, and also what Abraham was going through as he did this. It's actually considered one of the 10 trials of Abraham. How so? Well, here he's just been promised by Hashem. Last week's parasha, 2 weeks ago, this is the land, I give it to you, to your descendants. Abraham, this is the promised land, it's your land. And now Abraham has to grovel for a small area to bury his wife and demean himself before the Hittites, who actually eventually take huge advantage of him by making him pay an exorbitant price for this. But he refuses to accept it as a gift. He wants to pay for it. So what are we learning here? Well, first of all, the great faith of Abraham Avinu, that despite this having been given to him as a gift, this is his land. He's now having to grovel, as I said, and purchase a burial site. He can't just go bury his wife where he wants, and that's kind of sobering. This is my land, but yet it's not quite mine yet, and I've got to do all this. It's also upsetting. It's upsetting because that's not the first transaction he wanted to have in the land, to engage in a funeral and have to bury ground, a plot for his wife. I mean, he would have been happier purchasing a house for his son to get married in. That was to happen only later in this week's parsha, but later he is now forced for his first transaction, the first piece of ground that he buys in this so-called promised land, is connected with tragedy, with death, and with the burial. That's not a very, very pleasant. We have a deep connection with Israel. There's actually a interesting prayer we say in Benchik at the end when we say the Harachaman prayers, and there it is. We say to Hashem, Yishbo Aleinu Ma'atzavrenu, may He break the yoke. That's the yoke of oppression, the yoke of exile from our necks. And may He lead us upright to our land. What do we mean when we say may He lead us upright to our land? It means that we merit that we walk into Eretz Israel, fly, but walk off the plane and walk on the land, and not that we get to Israel um, in a coffin to be buried there, or worse, buried in Chutz La'aretz, and then it says when Mashiach comes, all of the bodies will only be resurrected in Israel. They'll have to be transported through tunnels underground to get to Israel, and there, only there, will the resurrection take place from Mount of Olives, which is why for many years, so many centuries, people wanted to be buried at the Mount of Olives so that they should be one of the first to come alive with the resurrection. It's a request that we actually be led upright, standing on our 2 feet, as we make our way to Israel, and not that we taken there for ultimate burial or for the revival of the dead when that time comes. And it's a sadness that Avraham Avinu, he's taking Sarah and connecting with the land of Israel, but at a point when she needs to be buried. So let's take this a little bit deeper. By the norms of the time, citizenship was established by burial. Nowadays, you ask, how is citizenship established? Well, by your place of birth. You're born in the country, you're a citizen of that country. Although more and more countries are actually removing that as an automatic qualifier if the parents are not citizens. So here in South Africa, for example, birth doesn't grant you South African citizenship unless at least one of your parents is a South African, but if neither of your parents are, then you don't become a citizen. That's actually very awkward for people who are not South African, but living here, as I am as a permanent resident. My wife's South African. But people who are living here as residents, but without citizenship, their children are born here, and then they really have a hard time regularizing their status in the country because it's no longer, and many countries are moving that way, simply because people are having, deliveries and births of convenience in countries because they want the people, and that creates huge refugee problems. Of course, we can understand that in this country, we can understand it in the United States. And personally, I was actually born in Copenhagen, in Denmark, but I tried unsuccessfully to obtain citizenship in that country because even back in the last century when I was born, that requirement already existed that you couldn't just become a Danish citizen, which would have been a great EU passport, if you were not of Danish parents, which my parents were not. But that's generally how we see birth as the determining factor in citizenship and belonging to a particular country. Back then, it was burial. If you were entitled to burial in a land, that meant that you had a connection with it. And this is why Avraham Avinu goes out to make sure that his fate, that of his descendants, are tied in by burying a place for Sarah to be buried in Hebron, and alongside her will be him, and with that cementing a bond, a relationship with the land. The verse in Isaiah talks about a man called Shevna. And Shevna, I'm going to go into the entire history of that, but Shevna didn't behave exactly in the way that he should. And the prophet says to him, in the name of Hashem, what have you here, and whom have you here, that you should have dug a grave for yourself here. Why do you think you're entitled to have burial here among these people? It seems that he had wanted to be buried among the monarchs of the house of David. It didn't belong to it. So burial place is status. And this is why Avraham Avinu is interested in buying a burial plot for Sarah there. But if you look carefully at the conversation between Avram and the Hittites, you realize that it's more than just place to bury. And I stress that when we read the text in Hebrew. I'm going to come back to it for a moment. But we find that sense of belonging with Abraham insisting on being buried there, and then Jacob, who ended up living and dying in Mitzrayim, also asking for his remains to be brought back to his land. He's not an Egyptian, so he does not want to be buried in Mitzrayim. He doesn't want to be connected with that land. And the Yosef, Joseph, and his brothers likewise. When the Jews eventually left Egypt at Joseph's instruction and request, their remains were taken back to the Holy Land. That was quite a mission. It took a few days to take Yaakov's remains back to Israel. It took 40 years to get Yosef and his siblings back to burial in Israel. So it was quite an ask of them all. And that is precisely that sense of connection and citizenship. So look how the discussion between the Hittites and Abraham goes. Where are they hiding these? Here we go. Abraham says, "Tnu li achuzat kever. Give me a burial site." Achuz actually means like a holding, a place for not just a grave, but a place for burial, a plot, a section where I want to bury. And what do the Chittat say back to him? They're not so happy. They say, no, choose yourself a grave. If Chakra, it's more select among burial places. There's no plots, there's no areas, there is just a plot. And Abraham is not happy with that. And this is why he haggles and it takes it up to the top and takes it to Ephron, who is in fact the one of the heads of the tribe. And he said, no, I want that field, the field of Machpelah, Lachuzat Kava, as a burial site, not as a grave. He wants somewhere where they're going to have a foothold into the Holy Hand, and they're going to be able to bury not just Avram and Sarah, but also subsequently Yitzchak and Rivka, and then eventually Yaakov and his wife Leah. As we know, Rachel was buried further north, closer to Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, in Bethlehem. So that's what Avram is actually asking. Avram is asking for a burial site. That means a cemetery, basically. And with that, he wants to establish and cement the connection between land and Jew. Yaakov, years later, when he is on his deathbed, and he reminds his sons, particularly Joseph, who was viceroy, and therefore had the ability to carry out that promise, he reminds him why he wants to be buried there. And he uses the words, please bury me there in the cave that's in the field of Ephron the Hittite. That is the place that Abraham bought, the entire field, from Ephron the Hittite, La'achuzat Kaveh, as a burial site. So Yaakov reminds them of this. Jewish burial of human remains is very important to us. So much so, I mean, it goes back to the beginning of history. That was the prediction or the curse, whatever you want to call it, to Adam in the Garden of Eden. And you have to work by the sweat of your brow to eat bread until you return to the ground, from which you were taken, your dust, and you return to dust. So ever since then, we have this mitzvah of burial, and we attach a lot of importance to that. Amazingly, if you look through the text that we were reading together earlier, you will find the Bnei Chet, the Hittites, that word mentioned 10 times. And there's a strange parallel drawn in the Talmud. It says those 10 times Bnei Chet corresponds to the 10 Commandments. Now, I haven't been able to find a correlation or a parallel between the 10 Commandments and the 10 mentions of the sons of Chet, except for this. The 10 Commandments are foundational in our belief system, our value system, in the way we are as Jews, as Dibrot. And that conversation that Avram has with the Hittites is foundational in that the sanctity we afford our dead is kind of one of the serious axioms and principles of Jewish faith. And as such, it's kind of compared to what we would see and treat as the highest value system, as Dibrot. There is the mitzvah of burying on the same day, the mitzvah of not defacing, disgracing a body in any way. Now, in other cultures, big deal. The person is no longer alive. Um, I heard the fascinating story recently of a man who had had two lives. He had had a child who was born in the Holocaust. He had lost his wife. He had remarried to a local non-Jewish woman, and he had a second child from that non-Jewish woman. But he kind of, the son moved there to Israel. He lived there in Israel, and then his half brother lived with his father in the United States. And then he gets a call from the son to say, please get onto a flight. Our father has died. And there he is. He arrives, and he finds out that his son has made arrangements to bury his father alongside his stepmother, his father's late wife, in a non-Jewish cemetery. And the brothers arguing, well, but they were married for decades, and that's where he belongs, and he's clearly turned his back on his roots. The brother says, absolutely not. She must be buried. He must be buried in the Jewish cemetery. That's his origins. He was born Jewish, and even though he may not have practiced Judaism, he died Jewish, and let's have him buried in a Jewish cemetery. So it was actually taken to court. They appeared before the magistrate and said, what's the problem? Uh, let's use Solomonic wisdom. We'll have his remains cremated, and we'll give you half the ashes to bury in the Jewish cemetery and half the ashes to bury alongside his wife, which, of course, was even worse than the original proposal. And eventually the brother says, our father died, not a poor man. I'm prepared to give up my inheritance. It turns out that it was quite a substantial inheritance. And finding out what his father was worth, he decided to call one of the great decisors in halacha, Rabbi Zilberstein, who lived in Israel, to say, look, do I have to spend millions of rands on the mitzvah of burying my father? What the final result is not part of the story. So I'm not sure what the rabbi answered him. I'm not sure if he actually did it. But the fact that a Jew was prepared to part with an absolute fortune, whether he did or not, in the end, whether he was obliged to halachically or not, that's for a different shiur, one day maybe. But the fact that he was prepared to spend that money just shows us how deeply rooted that is. How we resist, obviously, cremations, and we resist people who want to donate their bodies to science or have their bodies defaced. We resist, if you can, at all body being defaced by way of a post-mortem autopsy, unless it's absolutely unavoidable by reasons of the law. So that is kind of a core value that we have. It's that respect for a body that contained the soul. Because the body was a vessel for the soul, it now needs to be treated as something holy. The soul, of course, being a divine particle, and the human functioning as a body with a soul becoming something in the image of our Creator, in the image of God, that has to be respected. Just like we don't take our tefillin bag and discard it in the dustbin because it contained our tefillin, and as such, it was imbued with holiness. We cannot simply discard a human body, and it has to be treated with absolute dignity and sanctity. And this is a core value. Aseret Dibrot, remember, goes back to how connected we are, rooted we are in our religion with the Ten Commandments. And this is why it is a core value and one that we find an absolute need. I mean, we want the hostages back. Please God, all of them alive, but if any of them are not alive, we will fight for those bodies, as we fought for the bodies of other hostages over the decades, some of whom were returned to us eventually. That's why IDF soldiers go on the enemy fires to retrieve their fallen brethren. And this is why we absolutely venerate the Kedushat HaGuf, the holiness of a human body, as led by the example of Avraham Avinu at the beginning of our parasha. Thank you very much, and have a good night.